extremely brutal group emerged so rapidly? A new book offers one answer: the ISIS apocalypse, the history, strategy, and doomsday vision of the Islamic State. Its author is early Islam historian William McCants, senior fellow and project director at the Brookings Institution. He spoke recently with Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Margaret Warner.
Will McCants, welcome. You suggest right at the beginning of this book that it was triggered in a way by a question your father asked, which is, why do they do that? Is that what this book is, an answer to that?
That's right. My dad's 85 years old, and like most Americans, he watches the news, and he can't understand why a group like the Islamic State is so brutal to people, and why they would be so extreme in their actions. So it's for him that and people like him, that I wrote this book. So
you, as your title says, chalk that up to its apocalyptic vision. What is that vision?
That's right. The Islamic State believes that the end of the world is approaching, and it believes that it has also reestablished God's kingdom on earth, and that kingdom is going to wage an epic battle against the infidels before it all comes tumbling down.
And that drives them, what, with a special sense of urgency?
Gives them a special sense of urgency, but also has been terrific for recruiting. They have been able to attract a lot of foreigners to their cause, and many of the foreigners, based on interviews with journalists, say that the main reason they are there is because they believe that the world is coming to the end, and the Islamic State is a fulfillment of prophecy, so they're traveling there to do their bit.
Now, many of these recruits, at least especially the Westerners, those I've reported on, they aren't religious at all, and they certainly aren't scholars of Islam. Why would this prophecy of the end of days be appealing to them?
No, many of them don't know much about Islamic scripture, and they're not particularly religious, many of them, but they are intoxicated by the idea of fighting in end times battles and absolving their own sins. The first crusaders that set out to take over Jerusalem were also fired by the same sort of visions, even though many of them weren't very religious.
Now, how is the really horrific brutality and the way they publicize it in these videos, how does that play a part, or why is that part of it?
For many apocalyptic groups throughout history, not just Muslim ones, the apocalypse can be excused for very extreme violence because the normal rules don't apply. So in a number of these videos of members committing horrible acts, they will make reference to the fact that they are fulfilling prophecy.
They even talk about a small town in Syria near the Turkish border called Dabiq.
That's right.
What is that?
Yeah, there's a tiny town just north of Aleppo that one Muslim prophecy says will be the site of a massive battle with the infidels. And so the Islamic State last year made sure to take over the town in preparation for that battle.
You also say that the turmoil in the Middle East over the last 15 years has given evidence, at least to the leaders of Islamic State, that the end of days is near.
That's right. Extreme violence, political upheaval invites this kind of apocalyptic framework where more stable times would not. It also provides the opportunity for groups like the Islamic State to take advantage of the chaos in order to try and fulfill prophecy.
And so both invasions by the United States would count as part of that, civil and sectarian conflict, like we're seeing in Syria? Iraq?
That's right. That's right. And particularly among Sunni Muslims, apocalyptic thinking became much more popular after 2003 when the U.S. invaded Iraq.
Now, you've translated a lot of original documents, both from the Quran and from the Prophet Muhammad's prophecies. To what degree is this apocalyptic vision really supported by those?
There are some prophecies mentioned in the Quran, but mainly these come from statements that are attributed to Muhammad, which many conservative Muslims regard as a scripture second only to the Quran. So early Islamic scripture is filled with these kind of prophecies.
And they really are at the heart of it?
They are, and for many Muslims, they're very important, particularly when there is political upheaval in the countries in which they live.
And then what about the leader of this Islamic State, the Caliph, he's proclaimed himself, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? Did you get a sense of whether he really believes this, or is it just a ticket to power?
He is a religious scholar by training. From his early days, his nickname was the Believer because he had a very strict type of piety. And there's been nothing that's come to light so far to suggest that he's using these prophecies cynically.
this represents really a sea change. I think you called it a changing of the guards in the jihadist movement.
That's right. Al-Qaeda used to downplay these kind of prophecies, and they would put off the kind of state building that the Islamic State is engaged in. The Islamic State plays up these prophecies and uses them to motivate fighters for the exact task of state building. And given the political instability in the Arab world, I think we're going to see much more of it.
So there's no going back.
No, there's no going back. It's an idea whose time has come for the jihadist movement.
Then what recourse is there for the U.S. and its allies?
They have to contain the problem. It's not going to be possible to put this genie back in the bottle.
And what would it take to resolve these sectarian conflicts?
Well, fundamentally, it's going to require some tough political deals. The disenfranchisement of the Sunnis is what the Islamic State thrives on. And until those Sunnis are brought back into the political process, groups like the Islamic State will continue to thrive.
And the U.S. will play very little role in that?
That's right, because most of the Americans' partners in the regions have higher priorities than the destruction of the Islamic State.
Will McCants, thank you.
Thank you.